don't think there's anything that would physically prevent you from having sex in space. I don't know that anybody has while they were there. I did not. And if somebody wants to have sex in space, I think they'll figure out how to have sex in space. Hi, I'm Nicole Stott. I'm a NASA astronaut, an Aquanaut, and I am here to answer questions from the Honesty Box. And our first question is, describe the feeling of taking off in a rocket. Wow. So I launched on the space shuttle both times. It was extraordinary. Nothing that I did in a simulator or that I witnessed, watching so many space shuttle launches or talking to people who had done it before, I don't think any of that really prepared me for what that energy was all about. That is 7 million pounds of exploding rocket stuff underneath you on a space shuttle. You are shaking like you never imagined your body could shake. You are getting pushed off the planet in a way that just is overwhelming. And to go from sitting on the launch pad, just comfortable, kind of napping a little bit before launch, to wondering if you ever were on a launch pad, and then 8.5 minutes later to be falling around the planet, just effortlessly falling around the planet. It was a wild ride. Here we go, right into this one. How do you use the loo in space? At first, very carefully. For liquid waste, everybody the same. Big long hose with this yellow funnel on the end of it, which I think is funny, the yellow funnel, which is the engineers have a sense of humor as well. And we use the vacuum of space. We use vacuum to help us with this too. So it helps guide the fluid. So you take the cap off the funnel, you turn a little switch on, you hear this fan, and this vacuum starts working in the hose. And it's fun at first. I mean, it's a little messy at first, but you figure it out. It's so cool, again, how you figure out. I mean, you can be floating in any direction and do this. It's really pretty cool. All that liquid waste, that's all going into a containment system, and we actually recycle all of the liquid waste, a majority of that, into clean drinking water. Yeah. And as my friend Don Pettit, who's still on the space station right now on another mission, always likes to say, that yesterday's coffee becomes today's coffee. And then number 2 is a lot like camping. We have this can. I mean, it looks like just like a can with a lid on it. It does have a seat, but I don't think, like this little wooden seat for some reason, but I don't think anybody ever really uses this seat. You flip it open, and again, you've got to be properly aligned. You turn on a switch, and there's a fan and a vacuum that pulls the waste into the can. And then once that can is full, we seal it up and we put it into a cargo vehicle, and it eventually will separate from the station and burn up in the atmosphere. And it's kind of funny because I remember seeing that shooting star that was below us on the space station. And now whenever I see one from here on Earth, I'm like, oh, that could be like a burning up cargo vehicle with astronaut poo inside of it. Really beautiful, that I'm making my wish on. How many days have I spent in space? Well, I got to fly on 2 space flights, 2 missions, and I spent a little over 3 months on the International Space Station with 2 space station crews. I think a total of 104 days in space. Not enough. Oh, I can see what this one says already. What does space smell like? Well, it would be a bad day if you actually went out there and tried to smell it yourself, so don't do that. But the way we get some sense of what space smells like is through the interaction with us, with our spaceships, with our space suits. And when they come back into the space station, you get this very distinct, kind of sweet metallic smell is what I think of. I almost think, when you have a can of soup and you open the lid and that metal rubs against each other, there's a distinct odor to that. And that it was similar to that to me, as well as, and everybody's like, wow, that's 2 very different things, a can of soup to mildly overheating car radiator, But it is, it's like a sweet metallic smell. Can you have sex in space? Probably. I don't think there's anything that would physically prevent you from having sex in space. I don't know that anybody has while they were there. I did not. And but just like, I think about floating and swimming in a pool, you can have sex there. And if somebody wants to have sex in space, I think they'll figure out how to have sex in space. Do you get jet lag when traveling to space? Kind of, a little bit at the beginning when you get there, because when we're on the International Space Station, we have crew members that represent 5 international space agencies around the world. That includes, because of the European Space Agency, that's 11 countries right in there. So 15 different countries represented. All 5 of those agencies have a little control center down on Earth somewhere. And so in order to try to find a common time that would work for everybody, GMT is what's selected. So kind of like you're in London. And we work to that. So in the beginning, it's a little bit of an adjustment, but it just works well for everybody down here on Earth too. And it's nice to still have that 24-hour clock that you're working to, even though we get 16 sunrises and sunsets every day, because we're going around the Earth 16 times a day, every 90 minutes. And it's just gorgeous. So you can't rely on that sunrise and sunset out the window to tell you what time it is. What's the coolest thing inside the ISS? Well, I think the people inside are pretty cool, but there's a part of the ISS that's called the cupola module. It's this big bay window that faces towards Earth, and it has 6 windows that surround it, this ginormous round window in the middle. And if you have free time as an astronaut in space, you will be found in that module, because it just gives you this fantastic horizon to horizon view of the planet. And you can float in it, and you can look from one end of the space station to the other. So it gives you this really great view of where you're living in space at the time. That opportunity to view Earth that way was the most extraordinary part of the whole experience. I'm almost going to throw this one in the pile. What's my opinion on flat earthers? My opinion is they used to call themselves a global society of flat earthers. And they must not know what global means. But anyway, we're just going to put that one right down there.
The Earth definitely isn't flat.
The Earth definitely isn't flat. And we don't even have to go to space to know the Earth isn't flat. And when's the last time somebody fell off? And have you ever seen the turtle's head popping up out over the side of it? No. Oh, wow. How do you scratch an itch when you're in a spacesuit? Sometimes you don't. So, inside the helmet, yeah, because you're not really, you go like this and you're just hitting visor, right? The most difficult thing really is inside the helmet. Your eye starts itching or your nose or something. We have this little pad inside the helmet that's meant to be used to clear your ears, for you to push your nose on to clear your ears if there's a pressure difference that you need to deal with. But that same little pad can be used to rub your nose or your chin or something too. But I'll tell you, it's amazing what we can overcome, like psychologically overcome, like forget about the itch. I remember, and thankfully this didn't happen on my real spacewalk, but getting into the pool in our neutral buoyancy lab, the ginormous pool where we'd put the suits on and practice to do our spacewalks. Like the first 5 minutes into one of these 6-hour runs in the pool, a hair coming down out of my cap and just like, doing this thing, like right here. And at one point I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to call it. I'm not gonna be able to tolerate this for 6 hours. And then it was weird. It was like, okay, I just dealt with it. It wasn't poking my eye out, it was just irritating, so yeah. Rank the planets, starting with my favorite. Well, we're on it. We're sitting on it right now, spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Earth is definitely the favorite. Now you're gonna require me to know all the other ones. I think Jupiter is my next favorite. I just love the idea that the moons of Jupiter could be a place where we could go live. And when you look at Jupiter and think of the enormity of it in comparison to the size of Earth, that's just extraordinary to me, and the patterns and beauty that it presents to us. I like Neptune as well. I think there's something ethereal to the blues of that planet that are presented. I really like the idea of Mars and the possibility of us being in that place. Right now as human beings, the farthest we've traveled off our planet is 250,000 miles to the moon. Mars, at its closest orbit to us, I think is like 35 million miles away. It's going to be so different as human beings to travel to and from that place and to get there and have to turn it into a spaceship so we can survive, but maybe to discover what allowed life to survive there before us. Mercury is kind of cool to me. It's such this tiny little place that's closest to the sun, and yet it still survives. It's still able to survive and orbit around the sun at that distance. And Venus, which, I don't know, there's something to the idea of a planet that they think might have been like Earth before, but now is not hospitable to us at all. You know, what happened there and when would that have possibly been? Oh, Uranus, which I don't know. I don't know much about that planet. And it's funny, it's like, it gets a lot of jokes about it. Apparently it's a very, very cool planet, but that's probably the planet I know the least about. And then I'm old enough that I still have to think of Pluto as a planet. Solar system models don't seem right without Pluto as a planet. If aliens were real, would I want to meet them? Yes, I would. Wouldn't you want to meet, you want to meet them? And, you know, we get this question all the time, having spent some time living in space. You know, did you see aliens? Did any evidence from where you were on the International Space Station? And I didn't, no. You know, I saw things that were unusual, that seemed strange to me, like shooting stars below me. I mean, that was really super cool. And it seemed like when I first saw the first one, I was like, oh my gosh, what was that? You know, and I'm flying back to my crewmates in the other module and say, hey, I just saw this thing, this shooting light below. And yeah, shooting star, probably a piece of, debris or a micrometeor, burning up in the atmosphere. And I remember when that happened, like floating back to the window, like wanting to see it again, right? Because same thing like you do down here when you look up at the sky and see shooting stars, you want to make the wish and all of that kind of thing. But I remember thinking, holy moly, somebody should tell us about that before we get here, that you might see something like that. You know, it's so unusual to be looking down towards Earth and see a shooting star. But it reminds you of this idea of aliens and things, UFOs and, what if and all of that. And we would joke that maybe they're just so small that they see us, but we don't see them. I don't know. But I would love to meet them. Is there sexism in the space industry? Probably. I think it exists everywhere, sadly. But think about in the last 50 years of human spaceflight. You know, when we were going to the moon 50 plus years ago, it was pretty much all men. Like you look, there were no women astronauts. There were women working in the space program, but they were kind of behind the scenes, doing really incredible and important stuff, but kind of behind the scenes. In the control centers, this is where I think it really presents itself, is Mission Control Center in Houston. When we were landing on the moon, there was one woman in Mission Control, Poppy Northcutt, and she wasn't even in the front room. She was in the back cranking out numbers and doing really super important stuff. And in the Launch Control Center in Florida at Kennedy Space Center, there was one woman, Joanne Morgan. She was in the front room. She was kind of smack dab in the middle. And, you find pictures where it's like, where is Joanne? And now, 50 years later, which to some might seem like a long time, but is nothing in the grand scheme of things, 50 years later, women are running, really incredible women are running both of those critical control centers. When you look at all the people sitting in those, it's just this mix of humanity. Every flavor human you can imagine is somehow represented in that control center. And the same thing is true within NASA, when our training groups, within our science teams, all of it. It just is there. And I don't know what the secret sauce is, but we need to sprinkle it on all kinds of other industry as well. How do you wash your clothes on the ISS? Well, you really don't. You get enough clothes for the mission, and I think it would be surprising to people to know that I had one pair of khaki pants for the 3 months that I was in space. That one pair of khaki pants was fine for 3 months, because down here, our clothes lay on our body. The oils from our skin is getting into our clothes all the time, just because gravity is pulling them down on our bodies. Up there, your clothes kind of float on you, unless you've chosen for some reason, which I didn't, some, extremely tight pants. They're not rubbing against you the same way. So they stay clean. But we don't have a washing machine up there. And so, most of the clothes end up in a trash bag and then burn up in the atmosphere. Probably the cleanest way to get rid of your trash in one of our cargo vehicles. And but at some point in the future, we will need to be able to wash clothes in space when we're living on and in the moon in the future. Do I think tourists should be allowed in space? Yeah. I mean, I think we should be, just like the way we've explored on our own planet and have made it possible, or it's just become possible for more and more people to explore here on Earth, to get to places on Earth, whether that's on a boat or an airplane. I think the same thing should be true about getting off the planet as well. And I love that that's starting to develop. I love that people will have, even if it's for 5 minutes on a suborbital flight, that hopefully your heart, your mind are opened up in a whole new way to what our planet is for us, to this home that we have in space. And that the more and more people that get to do that, when they wake up in the morning, I have to believe that their feet hit the floor and they're thinking, I'm on a planet in space. And what do I need to do to behave like a crewmate here on this planet and not a passenger? And that's why I'm really hopeful for more and more people to have that experience. I think we need more crewmates down here on Spaceship Earth. How do you sleep in space? I slept really well. Best sleep I've ever had in my life, except for like the first couple days where your spine is kind of stretching out. Your spine elongates when you don't have gravity on it. And I grew like 1.5 inches in a day, first day getting there. So you get this lower back pain, but it goes away pretty quickly. And once that's gone, it was the best sleep I have ever had. You're kind of floating inside the sleeping bag. You find the position. Inside your crew compartment, it's cool, it's dry, nice ventilation. I mean, I didn't wake up until the alarm went off, either the one on my watch or some emergency alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning, but best sleep ever. I don't think all of my crewmates would agree with that, or all astronauts would agree, but it was great for me. How much do astronauts get paid? Not a lot. Government civil servant. You don't become an astronaut to get paid a lot of money. How fast can you go in space? Is there a speed limit? I don't think there really is a speed limit. I mean, there might be, but I don't think there is. And, Newton was right with all these laws of motion and stuff. You get it going and it's going to keep moving until something stops it. And we just have to provide enough energy to something to get it moving in space. And it's why we talk a lot about launching to Mars from the moon, or launching to Mars from a pad that's built orbiting the moon in space or somewhere in space, because to not have to fight that gravity, to use all that energy just to get out of the hold that Earth has on us, to be able to just even fall around the Earth in low Earth orbit, we should be doing that from space. And that'll allow us to use that energy to go even faster. Though I felt like I was going pretty fast. On the space station and the space shuttle, we were traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, which is not too shabby. How does going to space affect your body? Well, it affects your body in pretty much every way. All of our systems are impacted in one way or another, because you're going from this place that's normal to us, where we have this load of gravity. I'm sitting in this chair, feeling like I'm held down, to a place where everything floats. And that includes us. And that's us and, the fluids in us floating up towards our head. And so our muscles change, our bones change. It's really cool to me, though, how quickly our brains and our bodies figure out how to adapt in these new environments. So for the bones and muscles, for example, you get to space and you're floating, and our brain and our body, and kind of on the negative side, figures out, hey, I don't need to maintain bones or muscles anymore to live in this environment where I'm floating. So I'm not going to waste any energy maintaining them. So we have to work very hard. We have to counteract that loss of bone and muscle by exercising 2 hours a day and making sure our food is nutritionally good for us, and monitoring what's going on with our system so that we can come back to gravity where you feel really heavy when you get back. The muscles in our body, not just the ones in our legs and our arms, but our heart is a muscle, so it's shrinking a little bit while it's in space. The way our blood circulates is different. We've even started to see indication of blood flow that's not so good for us sometimes, where it's starting to kind of flow backwards and, risking a stroke in space, which is something you don't want to happen in space or down here on Earth. So all of these things and the way they change, we can learn about how to counteract them to live in space. But by doing that, we're learning how to proactively maybe manage some of those things down here on Earth. Now, what is an aquanaut? So happy I got to be an aquanaut. An aquanaut is somebody who spends an extended period of time living undersea. So as an aquanaut, I got to live in a habitat called Aquarius that was 60 feet underwater. And after you're down there for an hour, your body becomes so saturated with nitrogen that you can't just swim safely to the surface. So we would live in that place, and we would go diving every day and explore like we would if we were on the moon or on Mars, and we would do experiments inside of the habitat like we would be on our International Space Station, and we would eat food the way we would if we were in space, all of these things. And the one thing we couldn't do, though, was just go back up to the surface. And we couldn't do that until we had kind of depressurized the habitat to allow us to be in that space long enough to get all that nitrogen out of our body. And then we could just kind of gracefully swim back to the surface. But it's the best analog to living and working in space because you are in a real extreme environment. If something goes wrong there, you have to deal with it at 60 feet underwater with your crewmates, get everybody in a good shape and make sure the vehicle's safe before you can come to the surface. And the same thing is true in space. You can't just hop in your spaceship anytime you want and come home back to Earth. Do I feel bad about the carbon emissions of space travel? Yeah, I do. I feel bad about the carbon emissions of everything. And it's a bit overwhelming to think about it. One of the great things in the space industry, though, is that everybody's always looking at how we do things better. How do we solve the problem better? We believe there are solutions to the problems. We have mottos like, here's how we can, not why we can't. We want things to be better. And I think even in the rocket industry, they're looking at greener fuels. A lot of the rockets that are flying right now the fuel is a mix of hydrogen and oxygen. And what you get when you burn hydrogen and oxygen together is you get steam coming out the back, water. So the more we can do that kind of thing, the better. And I think that is changing. Can you watch TV in space? Yes, but you're doing it on your computer. When I was there, they were sending things up to us. I think maybe they can get things real time now. I'm not really sure with the way they have the interweb set up, but our ground teams are really great about sending us up movies and shows that we can watch.
What did you watch in space?
What did I watch in space? I watched like a lot of home improvement shows in space that I don't get to watch down here. So they'd send up like 10 episodes of some, in a season of some home improvement show. And then fun movies. Do you ever think we'll be able to live full time in space? Yeah, I think we're already doing it. We have had crew members on board the space station, different ones, albeit, kind of cycling out for months at a time, living on the International Space Station for 25 years now. That's pretty extraordinary to have had continuous human presence in space for 25 years. And I think we're looking forward to a time where we're continuing to do these things in low Earth orbit, but we're going back to the moon to establish a permanent presence in that place. And the moon is fantastic too, because you can pretty easily get back to Earth, a couple-day trip to get back to Earth when you're there. But there could be people in the near term living on and in the moon. And the same, I think, is hoped for Mars. I'm hopeful that we'll see that happen. Maybe not in my lifetime, but sometime. Should there be a global space program? Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're kind of getting there. Again, I think the International Space Station program has shown us how we benefit from bringing programs from all over the world together to do this work in space, which again is all about improving life on Earth. And I don't know if it'll ever be called a global space program, but I think we're moving in that direction of partnership, which is really good. Do you get sick of your fellow crewmates, fellow astronauts? No, not really. You're human beings. You're going to get sick of somebody always, right? But one of the greatest things about the way we train together is that we train understanding that we're human beings and that somebody might be better at you than something else, or people are not going to feel good every day. They might be irritated by something. And we very deliberately during our training make sure that we deal with that with each other so that when you're flying together, you already know kind of what to expect, and you accept it and you work it, and your mission is greater than getting upset with any one person.
So farts in space, basically in weightlessness, hot air doesn't rise. So the good thing is you probably won't smell your own fart, because by the time you've done it, it's already been taken away by the air conditioning system.